Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. A recent investigation by French media organization Mediapart has indicated that there were several millions of dollars paid off by a middleman, Sushen Gupta, in the Rafale deal in order to siphon off information to the French side, specifically Dassault. He seemed to be on the rolls of Dassault and was providing them with critical information that may have impacted the price negotiations for Rafale. This picks up, of course, on a story that was broken by The Hindu many months back. And the question is, where will things go from now? Will the Enforcement Directorate have to conduct an investigation? Does it look like the authorities in France as well will have to re-look into what happened with the Dassault side and, of course, the Rafale deal? And more importantly, what are the repercussions for defense deals going ahead for India? Other than that, of course, there's been plenty that's been happening on the electoral front and also on the health front with the COVID crisis that many cities are battling with. Joining me to talk about all of that is N. Ram. He's director of the Hindu Publishing Group and former editor-in-chief of the Hindu. Thank you, Mr. Ram, for joining in and speaking with me again. I want to launch straight into first a story that you really spearheaded in a lot of documents that you made public, which was regarding the Rafale story. Most recently, we have a 3-part investigation by a French media house called Mediapart. I want to first understand what you made of those revelations that their investigation found.
Yes, I think it does connect, doesn't it? Especially with that story that I sent you, published in The Hindu, which you have seen, I think, anyway, published on February 11th, 2020. As you'll recall that we published 6 stories, investigative pieces, backed by documents in early 2000. Although there was the money trail wasn't discovered there. The enabling arrangements for these commissions or kickbacks or whatever you call them had been laid, and in particular the last minute removal of the anti-corruption clauses, the integrity clauses, which also said no middlemen, no agency, no agents, and so on. And now this fits in what Mediapart has published, particularly the 3rd part of its story about Gupta, Sushen Gupta. The Indian Enforcement Directorate has been investigating his role in the Augusta Westland scandal, and I read there 50 million euros were paid, and they say probably to bribe politicians, etc., officials. But they have studiously kept, the investigating agency or enforcement has studiously kept out of the Rafale deal, his role in the Rafale deal. Yeah. Which has now been exposed by Mediapart. So here is something about, here, the beginnings of the money trail. They've got something on the money trail which was not part of the original. We didn't have it, which is why I think it didn't make the kind of impact the Bofors investigation did, where we straight away got onto the money trail, the money paid into secret coded Swiss bank accounts by Bofors. But here this is it. But the story, the 3-part story is also about the cover-up, typical on both sides. Same thing with Bofors, the same thing with the HTW scandal. It's not just the Indian side which is covered up, it's equally the French. They refer to both Hollande and Macron. And in the Bofors case, it was both Olaf Palme and Carlson who were involved in not letting the details emerge. They couldn't quite stop it because there are other agencies working, as in this case. The material comes out, but there is a strong political attempt by those in authority to cover up. Mm. Because all this business of clean defense deals, people no longer believe. Commissions are an endemic part of defense deals. Yes. A former president of India, in fact, I can name him, Mr. Venkataraman, said, he was also a defense minister. So he had learned that the standard rate was 6%. The larger the contract, then they'll try to bring down the percentage. So it's out there, and it's not just here, it's in France. There It's in many European countries.
Yes.
But whether the politicians were bribed there, I don't know. But covering up corruption or alleged corruption is really an extension of corruption, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think it's a good story by Mediapart. I have it. I don't read French, but I have the original also, and I think they'll get more.
I did speak with the journalist who broke that particular story, Mr. Ram, and he pointed out that there was a clear trail in terms of payoffs made by Dassault to the middleman Sushen Gupta in order for getting information, as you said, for leaking information. Equally, there seem to be aberrations on the French side. It looks from the data that is available right now that the Enforcement Directorate has been sitting on this information for 2 years now, since all of this was found in Augusta documents. We also understand that someone has filed a PIL in the Supreme Court to reopen the Rafale case. What is your sense of, what track this will take from an investigative basis, both on what happens here in India and whether or not now the pressure will build in France to start looking at this afresh?
I think there's not enough pressure because there have been other issues right now. There was in 2020, but that's a different story. Right now, there's no great pressure on the Indian government or on the French government. These stories have come out. But I think people have got a little inured to these scandals. So it's a job of investigative journalism to bring out in concrete detail, in fine detail, with documents, the story. What I learned from the Bofor's investigation was that we had pretty good evidence because commissions percentage payment, calculated on a percentage basis or base. Every time there was a supply from Bofors to the Indian government, a particular percentage, 3%, for example, for some Vinchada and the rest, went into the secret bank accounts, and they denied it. They denied it had anything to do with the deal. But why would somebody pay an agent or middleman such huge sums? It amounted to about $50 million US dollars. And much more would have been paid, but for the scandal, the whistle being blown on it, first by the Swedish media and then by us, the Hindu. So I think the pressure has to build up gradually. But one thing I learned is if journalists get too concerned about what is going to happen in the criminal justice system, then you lose focus. We'd like it to be done, but we have to prove to using our methods, using our measures, what we have learned. If you try to meet the standards of the Evidence Act, and then you are contending with those who are trying to cover up, investigating agencies slowing down either on their own or under pressure. If you allow for all that, the chances of conviction are very remote, unless it's a country like Singapore. And Bofors, I think it was all over within a year, within several months, in fact. The person was punished, went to jail, and that's it, took a bribe. But that's very rare. And it's not just in India, but in many European countries, and certainly in the United States, that the cover-up is extremely efficient. And if both parties seek to cover up or minimize the damage that investigative journalism it does by just publishing these stories, then I think it's very, very hard to get the outcome in the courts that we would all like, but it's beyond our control. And as for the Supreme Court on Rafale, although I was very pleased with one particular order which protected us, because they said stolen documents, but the fact that these documents that were published could be entered as evidence in the Supreme Court was a good thing. But the big game was lost because what Prashant Bhushan and Arun Shauri and Yashwant Sinha were trying to do, the Supreme Court didn't deliver justice, in my opinion, on that issue. It just shut the door on the whole thing, basically saying it's a government decision. And since we didn't have information on the money trail, it couldn't go further. Now I think if Mediapart is able to get concrete, documents on how much was paid in connection with this deal, or even if not in connection with this deal, something that looks smells suspicious, then I think we can make some progress. But the lesson I would reiterate is, we do our story, we write for the public, our readers, intelligent readers, well-informed readers, whether it's the Wire or the Hindu or whoever, and that's good enough. The rest is up to the system. The system is not up to it. The system is delinquent, as our system has proved to be in relation to corruption scandals. Then I think you could say that's it.
I do want to come to the point about reportage, but for one of these institutions, which is the Enforcement Directorate, does it not put them in a catch-22 situation, sir? Because here's investigative proof that all these documents actually lie within the Augusta Westland case. If the ED were to negate this information, it would also mean that any information related to the Choppergate now stands null and void. Do you think there is pressure, at least on that particular institution, to now take this forward?
I read in the Mediapart story, there's a reference to other deals.
Yes.
And Mediapart says this includes Rafale. But they will continue to deny that. They will take their own time to investigate or pause the investigation or block it. That's what one expects. That's what's been happening. Because even if there were honest officials there, and there must be, they will be under tremendous political pressure, because these agencies are not independent. That's the point. Even the CBI is not independent. The Supreme Court famously called it a caged parrot at one point. So I think that is a problem. It's an institutional question. So I think unless, there must be a document or a set of documents which strongly suggest that commissions were paid, and then they will say there is nothing preventing commissions being paid, because that was removed from the intergovernmental agreement. That's a story we ran a lot of time ago. And Mr. Mohanty, then financial controller, he wrote an article for the Wire on this. He's extremely, he comes in from the process and procedure side, good practices, the law, the defense procurement whole process, all that. So we know a lot about what has enabled this corruption to happen. We know a great deal about who was involved in changing the rules of the game. But we need, it seems that the threshold for this developing into a major issue seems to be a document which shows money was actually paid into somebody's account, how much, connected with this this transaction, the Rafale transaction, and then I think that can be the basis for the campaign to force them to reveal the truth. Otherwise, the enforcement is not going to make any progress on this. There's no incentive for them to do it, and there's a strong disincentive for the Enforcement Directorate.
Are there larger ramifications for defense deals in the future, sir? As you said, this ties in with the idea that the no corruption clause was dropped. It was obviously dropped at someone's behest, which it looks like has been done from the French side or Dassault's side. Are there ramifications for defense deals in the future, and how defense procurement will be carried out? Because it is, well within any other vendor's right to demand that this same clause is dropped in their case as well.
Absolutely, that's the whole point. Right now, that's even more important than finding out about this. The prospective, the impact. Yes, others can say that. Of course, they'll say this was an intergovernmental agreement. Actually, the IGA, if you read our stories, was a cover cover for so minimizing any controversy that would arise, in a transaction between the Indian government and the supplier, Dassault and Thales. in this case. Yeah, but they've used the excuse of an intergovernmental agreement. There is the need to have this, but actually it's not that the government is asked to say no corruption. The supplier has to give that guarantee, undertaking in a contract, and in the guise of not having this in an intergovernmental agreement, they let the supplier off the hook, and this will have huge implications for the future. Every major supplier. It depends on how badly the Indian side wants these defense items, these military items. But if you want it, every supplier is going to say, there's no need. It's open season for, corruption in the name of commissions, kickbacks. And these agents have worked. They've worked very hard. But what have they done? It's all illegal. They have, earlier during the Rajiv Gandhi period, they said they were going to ban middlemen from being in the corridors of the defense ministry. But there are various ways in which they can get through to the politician or the bureaucrat who makes the decision. And so there's very little hope for cleaning up defense procurement in India. And I must add, in many other countries as well.
Mm. What is also clear from the Mediapart investigation, Mr. Ram, is the fact that this is a relationship that went back many years. Sushen Gupta had started developing this relationship with Tissot way back in the 2000s, which means that this actually arches many governments from many sides.
Yes.
Even so, the media has been reluctant to report or talk about this at all. Why do you think this reluctance is so strong? Because at this point, it clearly implicates several governments. It's not just about the government in power at this moment in India.
Absolutely right. The media today are a different animal than what we had a few years ago. We had plenty of reason to criticize the so-called established or mainstream news media even before. But today, much of it is not non-independent, it's intimidated. In some cases, there may be an ideological affinity to this government, the BJP government, to the Hindutva ideology, the Hindu Rashtra project. I wouldn't accuse journalists of being far right or anything, but there may be an ideological affinity. Particularly, I hear about the top Hindi language newspapers, not necessarily the journalists, but people at the top, the owners and so on. The way they do propaganda. And just watch your TV channels. Barring NDTV, none of the news channels that I watch occasionally, can be said to be really independent in a true sense. There's a lot of propaganda out there. You just see the tone, the content of the whole thing. And so the media are a different animal today than what they were a few years ago, which is why we need other players like The Wire, Scroll, Quint. There are many others which can come in their own ways. And even the Ken, whatever be the other stories on the vaccine and so on, I think they do. It's worthwhile. And this is, I think, more space needs to be carved out for this section of the news media, which so far has been more independent, more investigative than many sectors of the established or mainstream, so-called mainstream media. That's my observation. We have to study the different, the media in different languages. None of us can do that. It has to be a collective effort. Maybe there are other independent voices elsewhere. Maybe there's a good investigative journalism, but I don't know about it, but it doesn't come up, it doesn't become visible in the public space. So I think that's the reason.
I want to swivel.
But I should also add the Caravan and so on. They do good investigative stories. And that, I think, is the positive side of what's happening today, which is why you have these new IT rules, I suppose. But that will take us to a different area.
So it will, and that one is equally thorny. I want to swivel to the elections, though, just for a little bit, and ask you your thoughts first, moving up from the south, of what you think might be the outcome in Tamil Nadu, where it seems like there is a wave of support for the DMK combine. Equally, though, people argue that the incumbent chief minister is still very popular in the state.
Oh, he's much less popular than the opposition leader, MK Stalin. Polls have brought that out. I would expect a big win for the DMK by itself and for the alliance. A very big win, and we'll have to wait and see whether it's going to be a sweep of the kind has happened in the past, which happened in the Lok Sabha election in Tamil Nadu, where the DMK alliance won 38 out of 39 seats, and then plus Pondicherry, it was 39 out of 40 in that region, Tamil Nadu plus Pondicherry, which is largely a Tamil-speaking area, Union Territory. So I'm very confident that these polls will come right, and the DMK and its alliance, the alliance it leads, are headed for a big win.
What do you think is the single most important factor for that, sir? Is it a huge anti-incumbency wave? Is it, as some people point out, the wrong partnership for the AIADMK, where the BJP is perhaps the least popular in Tamil Nadu than any other state in the country? Or would you put it down to something else?
Yeah, I think the alliance, the BJP is a liability for the AIADMK. That's come out in several polls and in several discussions. They would have been better off had they not allied with the BJP, but they had no choice because the present leaders are not a Jayalalitha or an M.G. Ramachandran who could hold their own. It used to be a relationship between equals, even though Jayalalitha was often seen to have an attitude of soft Hindutva. She was also able to assert her independence and or refuse to go with them. So it is clearly a liability. The polling data from pre-election opinion polls have brought it out. In one particular poll where I was on the panel on a Tamil channel, Pudiya Thalaimurai, it came out very clearly that on question, when they were asked, has BJP done, has the central government been good for Tamil Nadu? The answer overwhelmingly was no. Is the alliance good? Most of them thought the AIADMK shouldn't ally with it. But the most interesting thing was, on every measure, on every front, the DMK's lead over the AIADMK alliance was well in excess of 10 percentage points. And if you allowed for those who did not reveal their preferences, that is, don't know, won't say, etc., then it would go up to about 12, 13, even 14 percentage points, which means the real sweep. That kind of gap in share of the popular vote means a huge landslide in favor of the winner. And the results were internally consistent. You asked about the present chief minister. Yes, his stock had gone up a little bit, but still it was more than 10 percentage point, the gap, much more than that, in fact, between Stalin and the chief minister, EPS, as he's called.
Yeah.
So,
would you expect it to be a tighter contest in Kerala?
Yes, of course. Yes. The poll showed that the LDF was poised to break with the usual pattern. When one term, the other party got a chance, alternating alliances. But it got tighter, there's no question about it. I think the left leaders I spoke to are still hopeful. The Congress is claiming that they made up and were ahead and so on. It's going to be tight. But I think the LDF government in Kerala did very well in responding to every conceivable crisis that Kerala has faced over the last 5 years. That's the Nipah virus, the floods, and the pandemic. The way they protected migrant workers, provided shelter, food, healthcare, and so on. So I think that's been, Kerala has handled it well, and it is possible that this government will be rewarded exceptionally, it would be an exception to the rule for its competent and bold handling of these issues. And I personally hope that they will get a second term.
Mm. For unfortunate reasons.
The Pinarayi Vijayan government.
Yes.
The chief minister in particular has shown, I think, great initiative and competence in handling these challenges with very little support from the central government. On the contrary, all kinds of attempts to damage the work, the output, if you like, of the Kerala government.
For unfortunate reasons, the state that has been the most in focus is Bengal. It has had a very violent run-through of elections so far. Do you believe, as some analysts point out, that a change in guard in West Bengal would be a very, very serious shift in elections and in politics across India? Or do you think that perhaps there is an outside chance there may be a change there as well?
I think if the TMC lost power and BJP or with their allies had come up with a majority, it would be significant. But people tend to read too much into, oh, this is going to change forever, etc. I'm not one of those who believes that things change in politics. So assuming even if the BJP gets into power in West Bengal, that's not the end of the story. It's not going to be a paradigm shift. Phrase, that cliche that is often used in this. I don't think so, because others could stage a comeback. You saw what happened to the left, which the share of the vote came down so badly in the last election, and a lot of it shifted to the BJP. It appears the base. So those things could change, particularly in the context of alliances. Often it's arithmetic. There's arithmetic and there's chemistry, if you like. And the arithmetic, if you build up to a certain level, there could be a change. So I'm not one of those who, because we've been wrong in the past. You claimed but with more experience, you know that, journalists tend to sort of sex up their stories very often. And it's easy to come to absolute conclusions. It's a paradigm shift. They've got India. I think that's inaccurate and shows a lack of experience.
Mm. And even as we talk about defense and elections, there is one piece of arithmetic that is not adding up well for us, Mr. Ram, which is the situation with COVID. I think as of today, globally, India is ranked number 1 in terms of daily new cases. Is this a mess we brought on ourselves administratively, politically?
Absolutely. I think now more is coming out in the press, in fact, on this. For example, a story that states there's a shortage of vaccines came several days ago, and the government initially denied the story and sort of criticized the press. But now it's admitted that the vaccines are not enough. I think it's arguable whether India is 2 or number 1 in the world in respect of actual cases, because given our poor record in testing, poor rates of testing, and also the claims earlier, remember that we had achieved herd immunity in some places, and so on. These numbers, when you talk about cases, you can go by that number because that's tested. So somebody who's tested positive. But if you're talking about infection, WHO went on record earlier, and also Indian experts, whether it was 20 times the number of cases or the number infected. I read a report that in UP it was 200 times at one point, and so on. In Kerala it was 60 or something. So that's the range. So we don't want to exaggerate or do too much guesswork, but it's brought on by many things. One is the first lockdown itself. Now there are 2 impacts. One is on health of those who are infected, and the other is the socio-economic impact. Both are important, And ideally, you would strike a balance between the two. The first lockdown was a disaster because, some people would say it stopped the spread, but the cost of doing that was extremely high, particularly for the poor. Harsh Mandir has published a book on it. There have been many reports. There have been documentaries about the impact of the lockdown on migrant workers. This documentary by Vinod Kapri called 1,232 Kilometers. A book is coming out on that, and so on. So that was part of it. Then I think the vaccine story, the testing, RT-PCR tests, did we put enough resources into this? Absolutely not. Then the boasts, we were showboating for a while, saying that India is, although the caseload is high, the case fatality ratio is very low which is true in large part. It's yet to be explained whether there's anything in the situation that contains the number of deaths. But then you know that not all deaths are reported. And the only way you'll tell is over a period, excess mortality. That's the most reliable indicator of the actual death toll taken by COVID-19. But still, it does appear that there are developed countries where the death rate is much higher, significantly higher, whether UK or France or many European countries, even the United States. But we were showboating, we were boasting that we are doing well. Also the boast that the world's vaccine factory, and that is a story that I just read in the Ken, how India lost the vaccine war, even though it sounds a bit alarmist and possibly even premature. There's a lot of substance in that story about how government and policy have not acted wisely in relation to providing vaccines for India and also for the rest of the world. And the contrast there is the United States, which is completely different. It's a different ball game. Operation Warp Speed, provided a lot of assistance for research and development to the private companies, whether it's Pfizer didn't take it, but Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and the whole lot. I saw some figures, $16 or $17 billion just handed out from taxpayers' money. They also ordered vaccines. Now, in the Indian case, very little support, as far as we know, provided for the big players in the vaccine manufacturing industry, especially Serum Institute of India. And there's a great deal of uncertainty about the orders. How many doses are you going to buy from us? At what price? And so on. It's good that there is price control. I think we must recognize that. And nobody's complained seriously about black marketing in vaccines in India, which is, I think, a positive thing. That's good. But we are short. And also, it places these companies, in particular SII, in a very difficult situation with respect to contracts for exports. You said you're encouraging exports. India is the world's vaccine factory and all that, and they've had to go back on those orders. It happens elsewhere. The US, using a special defense act, has blocked supplies, and the Indian manufacturers have complained about it, have spoken about it. But there's no real policy here, no coherent policy on vaccines. And then take the question of approval. The regulator is supposed to be independent, guided by experts. But how on earth would a vaccine like Covaxin, I'm not saying it's a bad vaccine, it may turn out to be safe and effective. But how was it approved? It was approved, quote, in the, must be the only first in the world to be approved in the clinical trial mode, which means everyone who took it was a volunteer, which they were not, which is why there's a lot of protests initially. Now, of course, it's moved beyond that stage. And the vaccine like Sputnik V for vaccines, is, it's taken quite a while for it to be approved. If you would apply the same standards as for Covaxin, I think Sputnik, we would have had earlier delivery and supplies of Sputnik, which in peer-reviewed publication in the Lancet and so on has been shown to be highly effective. One of the 3 vaccines in the world with 90% plus efficacy, as the data showed. It published in Lancet in some weeks ago. But it's good that it's been approved, but it's rather late. And so what are we going to do about this? Then there's the other issue about people's behavior. We can't skirt around it. I think all over, the advice, there's been plenty of campaigns which said, whether it's official or media or doctors, NGOs, that use masks, physical distancing, admittedly difficult in the Indian context, and then wash your hands, etc. But I go, wherever you go, you see there's little compliance. Some states do better than others. Kerala, the compliance in Kerala is not 100%, but is much better than in, say, Tamil Nadu. And then you have these huge religious gatherings. You now have the Kumbh. So I think it's a combination of official policy and also the way a society is made. But could it not have been handled better? I don't think you could have ensured 100% compliance. That would be impossible in any country, including India, especially in India. But you could have done much better on that. Today, Dr. Srinath Reddy, cardiologist, epidemiologist, president of the Public Health Foundation, has written a very thoughtful article on the Hindu, published in the Hindu, in fact, on what kind of response is needed. There's a lot there, which he's talking about. Restrictions are necessary, but not the kind of absolutist lockdown. If you're thinking about a lockdown, prepare for it. Prepare for it. Make sure that people's basic lives and livelihood are protected to a minimum degree. Livelihood, lives are to be protected. So I think India has failed, and it's reflected in the largely negative press abroad today. I've been reading major newspapers. I don't think their intentions are malign. They're just reporting the truth, things that don't come out in our press. Earlier, there was a very laudatory coverage of India's vaccine manufacturing capability and prowess, expertise, and so on, how they built up. But as the story in the Ken brings out, 1 year has been wasted, largely wasted in developing. We should have used it to develop this capability and produce results.
Right.
And this uncertainty is what I think has created a lot of the problem.
No, absolutely.
Of policy. They don't come out with a clear policy statement, what they will do for vaccines, for the manufacturers. But the good thing is prices are being kept under control.
Absolutely. You're right, sir.
Vaccine prices.
You're right. And I think that even if 1 year is a drop in the ocean, the bigger fear is what are the long-term consequences of what we're all living through with COVID and the way it has been handled. Thank you, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for this freewheeling chat and your time today and your thoughts.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.